This is CBS News at the home of John Glenn in Arlington, Virginia.
And the Glenn family and the entire country, I'm sure, by now is aware that the count stands here at Cape Canaveral at T-minus 60 minutes and holding. That hold went into effect a few minutes ago. Colonel Powers, the Project Mercury spokesman, said that the hold would last for about 30 minutes, about half an hour. So perhaps in 25 minutes or so from now, the count will resume. The reason was a small technical problem. A bolt was broken on the hatch on the Mercury spacecraft and has to be replaced. There have been a couple of other small delays as the count proceeded in the early hours here at Cape Canaveral this morning, but nothing very serious. And at the moment, the only thing that would interfere with a launch attempt today, as far as we can tell, the only thing would be the weather. And the weather here at Cape Canaveral remains cloudy. The count again, T-minus 60 minutes and holding. T-minus 60 minutes and holding. Well, right now, here at CBS News, we're going to leave the air temporarily from our special coverage of the Project Mercury launch attempt, but we will be back in 15 minutes. Right now, this is Dallas Townsend at Cape Canaveral.
This is the CBS Radio Network.
20th, flight number 2764, American Airlines, Music Till Dawn.
A great new plane has taken over the sky. Its voice is soft, almost silent. It moves gently. In flight, it seems almost motionless. Yet this plane can reach speeds just underneath the speed of sound. Its name is the Astrojet. Its markings the insignia of American Airlines. Fly the Astrojet, America's leading plane. On America's leading airline.
The Astrojet's the wings of American. 9 flights each day to points east on American Airlines. Check with American at Yukon 21234 for this fine service, or with your travel agent wherever you are. Again, our theme, American Airlines, that's all. But I imagine we'll be back in just a few minutes after a switch to Cape Canaveral to check with the Dallas Townsend on what's going on this morning at the site of the John Glenn orbit shot, or the orbit attempt this morning, which was delayed. Well, I don't know whether John Glenn is a smoker or not, but you know, if you can't do without cigarettes, you can never be an astronaut, or as the Russians call them, a cosmonaut. Word is that out there'll be no smoking for anybody in orbit. You'll just have to settle for a trip 6 miles above the Earth in one of American's great Astrojets. And while, of course, you won't be in orbit, you'll have a great time, we know, smoking to your heart's content. And nobody will complain because the Astrojet's ventilation and air conditioning system moves yards and yards of fresh air inside and outside the cabin every minute. And all of the air comes in at just the right temperature for you. And by the way, how's this for service? If you should forget your cigarettes on the ground or run out while you're up in the air, American's charming stewardesses will be most happy to bring you a pack. So go on up and light up on the Astrojets of American Airlines, America's leading airline. 9 Astrojets from San Francisco each day. This is KCBS in San Francisco.
This is Dallas Townsend at CBS News in Cape Canaveral. The countdown here is T-minus 60 minutes and holding as the National Space Agency moves toward this country's first manned orbital flight. Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn, the astronaut, is secured inside the Mercury spacecraft, waiting for that great moment. Glenn has been inside Friendship 7 now for a bit less than 2 hours. The complicated and laborious procedure of making final adjustments, fastening Colonel Glenn into place on his couch, which was molded to fit his body, and securing the hatch with its 72 bolts, all these things are still underway. There were a few minor delays earlier in the morning to replace a transponder in the Atlas booster, to replace a broken bolt. But the countdown here has proceeded well. All systems are go, as they say in missile land, with one exception, the weather. Right now, it's cloudy over the launch area. The sun is concealed behind a bank of clouds. But there are patches of blue here and there. Colonel Powers, the Project Mercury spokesman, didn't sound too optimistic about the weather in his last report, but to a layman's eyes, and judging from our experience with Cape weather in the past month, these clouds could burn off as the sun rises in the sky. There appear to be two layers of clouds, a high layer, about 6 to 7/10 cloud cover, and a low layer which is blowing off rapidly. Downrange in the main recovery areas, the weather is excellent in all three, where Colonel Glenn could land at the end of 1, 2, or 3 orbits. On balance, conditions appear excellent for a launching this morning. Colonel Glenn got up early, about 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. He had breakfast, and it was a big breakfast. He is reported to be in good spirits, and he appeared to be exactly like that when he left Hangar S and took the short ride to Pad 14. Again, the count is T-minus 60 minutes and holding. We'll be back in 15 minutes. This is Dallas Townsend at CBS News, Cape Canaveral.
And this is Ken Ackerman at KCBS in San Francisco. This is American Airlines Music Till Dawn, resuming. Before an American Airlines plane takes off, 10 of American's divisions must approve that flight, and if anyone says no go, well, that flight does not go. That you can be sure. Now, this results, of course, in a certain number of canceled flights, but it means that when you fly American Airlines, you only go when conditions are right. For example, the weather along the flight path is studied not only by government forecasters, but by Americans' own meteorologists, our dispatchers, pilots, and co-pilots. And when your plane takes off, you can rest assured that ground conditions and ceilings and cloud patterns, storm areas, everything that goes to make up the weather way up there has all been analyzed by pros, persons in the know. You say American Airlines is finicky, fussy? Well, you're right. You're right. That's one of the big reasons why experienced travelers consistently choose American Airlines, and why it's the leader in flight. It's 12 minutes until 5 here at KCBS, American Airlines Music Till Dawn. Music Till Dawn, 6 days each week from San Francisco, from KCBS. Flights courtesy, the leader in flight, American Airlines. KCBS in San Francisco, the time is 5 a.m. at American Airlines Music Till Dawn. And from KCBS News, 5 minutes of the latest. Astronaut John Glenn is in the space capsule at this moment atop the huge Mercury rocket at Cape Canaveral, awaiting completion of the countdown to send him into 1, 2, or 3 orbits around the Earth. The countdown is expected to resume shortly. There was a cancellation not a cancellation actually, but a hold for a short time because of a broken bolt on the hatch of the space capsule. The actual time when Glenn will take off still depends on the weather. A broken cloud cover is over the launch site, but officials are hopeful that it will not delay the attempt to send Glenn into orbit. Glenn talked by telephone with his wife and children in Arlington, Virginia, and to his parents in New Concord, Ohio, before retiring early last night. Both families are watching today's developments on television. Defense Secretary McNamara is on the way home by jet after a day of talks with military and diplomatic leaders in Honolulu on the situation in Southeast Asia. In a written statement at the end of the conference, McNamara said the South Vietnam War seems to be stabilized, but he warned that guerrilla fighting could continue there for years. President Kennedy will send a message to Congress today outlining a new pay plan for federal workers, including additional pay for superior skills. The president's proposals are expected to follow recommendation of a presidential panel, which urged in a report February 14th that skilled government workers be paid the equivalent to what non-government workers get for the same kind of work. U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy has arrived in Rome for a 2-day visit, during which he will have a private audience with Pope John. Kennedy and his wife flew to Rome from Bangkok, Thailand, at the conclusion of the Asian leg of their world tour. Informed sources in Washington say U-2 pilot Francis Powers has agreed to take lie detector tests during his questioning by U.S. intelligence agents. The flyer, who was shot down while on a flight over Russia in 1960, was recently exchanged for Soviet master spy Rudolf Abel and returned to this country after a period of imprisonment in Russia. Leaders of the Women's Strike for Peace have urged Mrs. John Kennedy to match that radio appeal of Soviet Premier Khrushchev's wife Sunday. They suggest that the First Lady beam a broadcast to the Soviet Union urging peace and understanding. The Assembly Ethics Committee of the New York State Legislature has found House Speaker Joseph Carlino innocent of a charge he had violated the State Code of Ethics in connection with fallout shelter legislation. Carlino had been accused of conflict of interest violations by serving as director of a fallout shelter company. At the same time, the legislature passed a law to encourage the construction of such shelters. The first trial to result from the arrest of 735 Negroes during anti-segregation marches in several states will be held in Albany, Georgia today. The case of the Reverend Ralph Abernathy of Atlanta is the first on the trial docket. News here in the far west. Negotiators from 3 waterfront unions have agreed to meet in San Francisco next Monday with a panel of mediators in an effort to avert a West Coast shipping strike. The walkout was postponed for at least a week after the panel was appointed. The mediators were called in a showdown as it neared between the unions and the PMA. The dispute involves the Sailors Union of the Pacific, the Marine Firemen, and the Marine Cooks and Stewards. Dozens of firemen battled a huge warehouse fire at a cereal plant in Stockton this morning. All available equipment dispatched to the scene on Church Street. Firemen say the blaze has been contained, the damage around $100,000. An explosion shattered a 3,300-gallon tank truck in Mountain View yesterday. The blast apparently was touched off when a welder's torch ignited fumes. The explosion at the Richards Trucking Company seriously burned the welder Albert Silva of San Jose and damaged a shop building. A major Republican campaigner for the California governorship, Richard Nixon, wound up a 2-day visit yesterday with ex-President Eisenhower in the Palm Springs area of Southern California. Nixon and his wife have flown home now to Los Angeles. And California's Governor Brown has attacked extremist groups. He calls them the voices of the cuckoo. The governor made his attack in a speech to University of California students in Berkeley. He said extremist groups, as he phrased it, must be fought just as hard as we combat the communists who totally misunderstand and totally reject our democracy. General Secretary Gus Hall of the American Communist Party said in Los Angeles that it's a good guess that he will be included if a federal grand jury indicts party officers. The Communist Party has been charged with failure to register its officers with the government as required by the McCarran Act. The Highway Patrol in San Jose is looking for anyone who witnessed the collision which killed 5 persons on the Bayshore Freeway. The crash occurred February 11th, and the CHP says it wants to know why a northbound vehicle crashed through a barrier onto the southbound lanes. Another car hit it, causing the death of all but 2 of the 7 people involved. Patrolmen say they have conflicting accounts of that crash and need additional witnesses for verification purposes. Albert Elkis, a key figure in the musical life of the San Francisco Bay Area, has died in Oakland's Kaiser Hospital at the age of 77. Elkis was a professor of music at the University of California in Berkeley for 20 years. Upon his retirement in 1951, he became head of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. In these positions, he worked with many of the giants of modern music, as well as composing some pieces of his own. He's survived by his wife and 2 sons. Albert Elkis. 6 minutes after 5 at KCBS on American Airlines Music Till Dawn. Just 9 minutes from now, we'll be switching down to Cape Canaveral for the latest on-the-scene report from Dallas Townsend. Here in San Francisco, there's variable clouds, occasional showers today, tonight, and Wednesday. The high during the afternoon, 54 degrees. Our rain chances, 50%. Today, tonight, and Wednesday. Astronaut John Glenn, still in his space capsule atop the huge Mercury rocket at Cape Canaveral, awaiting completion of the countdown to send him into 1, 2, or 3 orbits around the Earth. And it's expected that the countdown will resume shortly at T-60. 6.5 minutes past the hour. That's the time in the West on American Airlines Flight to Light, flight number 2764. Planning a flight to Chicago? Make that flight on American Airlines. American Airlines, the leader in flight. American offers you a choice of 4 non-stop Astrojets every day from San Francisco to the Windy City. 4 a day. You can take wing at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's a flight at high noon, one at 3:45 in the afternoon, if you wish. 4 a day from San Francisco to big town New York City in the wings of American Airlines. From San Francisco, from KCBS, this is your Flight to Light American Airlines Music Till Dawn. In just 30 seconds, we'll be switching back to Cape Canaveral for the latest word from Dallas Townsend, and then we'll resume our music till dawn, unless they hold it at Cape Canaveral. The time is nearing 5:15 here at KCBS on your Flight to Light. This is KCBS in San Francisco.
This is Dallas Townsend for CBS News at Cape Canaveral. The countdown here at Cape Canaveral resumed a few minutes ago. It's now at T-minus 50 minutes and counting. T-minus 50 and counting. That hold we were in for a while lasted about 40 minutes. It was caused by a broken bolt in the hatch on the spacecraft. The hatch had to be removed and the bolt replaced. All systems now are reported go. Up to now, the only problem has concerned the weather. High and intermediate cloud cover early today over Cape Canaveral, and that would, of course, interfere with optical observation of the launch attempt. But the clouds are burning off rapidly. The sun is now shining brightly, and it's increasingly warm here at the Cape. It's warm and muggy. And downrange, all weather is reported excellent in all three main recovery areas. So right now, it appears to us that there will be a launch this morning of John Glenn into orbit. Colonel Glenn awakened soon after 2 o'clock this morning. He had a hearty breakfast, he shaved, he had a shower, and after that a physical examination, and then he got into the transfer van for the short trip, which actually lasted about 15 minutes, from Hangar S, where he has his quarters, to Pad 14, where the Atlas and the Mercury spacecraft were awaiting him. He got into the spacecraft a bit more than 2 hours ago, and he's been there now, waiting quietly for the great moment when he will be launched into space. He's reported to be in good spirits. Colonel Powers, the Project Mercury spokesman, says that Glenn was in very good spirits, excellent spirits, when he talked to him early this morning. There was a lot of good-natured banter back and forth around the breakfast table. Nothing serious, no shop talk. This was not the time for it. And again, the countdown right now is T-minus 48 minutes and counting. We'll be back at 30 minutes past the hour to resume our CBS News coverage of this country's first manned orbital flight. This is Dallas Townsend, CBS News, Cape Canaveral.
This is Ken Ackerman in San Francisco for American Airlines with Music Till Dawn at 17 minutes after 5 here in the city by the Golden Gate. And as Dallas Townsend told you, he'll be back at our time, 5:30, just 13 minutes from now. Until then, music's take us down to touchdown point on American Airlines Music Till Dawn, the music of Jerome Kern in just a moment. Ever wonder how a pilot remembers all the things he's supposed to do before he takes wing? Well, today's pilot doesn't have to rely on memory alone. He's got an instrument that remembers for him, and they call it the memory box, and it's a very important little box to them. It requires your pilot to take 16 different steps, every one essential to takeoff, and for landings, another 16 must be checked off, sort of like a countdown. Well, this is the way it works. Just imagine every time you got into your car, there would be a device which would say, close the door, insert the key, check the gas gauge, press the starter, release the emergency brake, and press the accelerator, and so forth. Well, something like that would drive you kind of batty, wouldn't it? But in an airplane, the pilot is glad it's there, and all American Airlines planes have that memory box. It's one of the hundreds of things that makes modern air travel so dependable. So next time you fly, use the wings of American Airlines, the choice of experienced travelers. See your travel agent or call American, America's leading airline.
This has been CBS News at Cape Canaveral, where today we saw the start and heard the finish of this country's first manned orbital flight. Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn, United States Marine Corps, went 3 times around the world and has come back safely. CBS News will continue, as we say, in about half an hour from now with that NASA News Conference, and later this evening with a special recap at 7:10 Eastern Time. This is Dallas Townsend at Cape Canaveral.
Man in Orbit, another important moment in history, brought to you by Rambler and your Rambler dealer, who invites you to take advantage of his weekend special deal on a new Rambler. This is the CBS Radio Network.
KCBS, KCBS-FM, San Francisco. Mom, I'm in love. She's a girl in the Mother's Cookies song.
Oh, dear. I always hoped that someday you and Emmy Lou would be together again.
But, Mom, I know you'll love this girl.
Can she do needlepoint like Emmy Lou?
I guess not. But that doesn't seem to matter anymore. Let me play her song for you, Mom.
Well, put it on the gramophone.
Okay. She's the one on the left.
Mothers, I like your others. The cookies in the passionate purple package.
No more, son. It's a dreadful song.
But you've always liked Mother's Cookies. They're fresh and they're delicious. You know that. You love Mother's Cookies.
Yes, but that's all. Emmy Lou knows the Mikado.
But, Mom...
Son, let me put away the gramophone crank until this other girl is out of your system.
Gee,
Think
Mom.
of Emmy Lou. It would break her heart.
I can't help it. I like Emmy Lou a lot, Mom, but golly, she won't be up for parole until next year.
Like coconut, then try Mother's Delicious Snow Puffs at your grocer's now. Mother's Snow Puffs.
He made it, and a happy nation rejoices in the accomplishment. The Senate and a rebuff for the administration, the President and the government workers' pay, and a communist setback in the United Nations. This is Prescott Robinson in New York, sitting in for Douglas Edwards, reporting for the CBS Radio Network. Humanity today was as nearly united as humanity ever can be, as communists, Republicans, Democrats, pious and impious men kept eyes on the screen, ears to the speaker, and prayed, whether they willed it or not, that astronaut John Glenn would get successfully off the Earth and once up there would come successfully down again. That he did both these things, the world now knows. For the latest word on the miraculously fortunate feat, here is CBS News correspondent Charles Van Fremd, direct from Cape Canaveral.
What is there to say after a day without precedence in America's space achievements? Only that it was sensational, dramatic, with a happy ending. And though it was a very long time coming, it was very worth the wait. John Glenn is now on the destroyer Noah, out in the Atlantic Ocean after a 4-hour and 50-minute rocket ride that carried him 3 times around the world. From his destroyer position, he will be moved to Grand Turk Island in the Bahamas, and there he will spend the next 48 hours relaxing and also going through what the space agency calls a debriefing, in which he will tell doctors, psychologists, people assigned to the Project Mercury program, just everything that he can think of that he experienced during his 4-hour and 50-minute ride. Also, of course, he will get a good deal of rest and relaxation. After that, it's assumed that Glenn will fly to Washington, where he'll receive a hero's welcome, just as did the first American man in space, Alan Shepard. That would include a meeting at the White House with the president and probably a news conference. Scientists, of course, will start evaluating all the data they got from miles and miles of telemetry right away. And as Walter Williams, the project officer for Project Mercury, has said before, this flight was just the end of the beginning. It was the first American orbital flight, but by no means the last. The next one on the schedule should come about 60 days from now, when astronaut Deke Slayton will try and match Glenn's historic ride. Sitting right here now in the CBS mobile unit and looking out across the way towards Pad 14, it's rather hard to believe that it was just at 9:47 this morning that Glenn made his ride. In the intervening hours, we've been bombarded with all sorts of material from Project Mercury spokesman John Shorty Powers, and there'll be a news conference to follow in just about 30 minutes' time. CBS News will carry that news conference from the Cape in about 30 minutes' time. That's the story for now, though. This is CBS News, Cape Canaveral.
In other news today, tradition-minded United States senators don't like to be pushed, and today a hurry-up procedure to force a showdown on President Kennedy's plan for a Department of Urban Affairs didn't sit too well. By a surprising margin of 15 votes, the Senate rejected a motion to force an early vote to create the Department of Urban Affairs. Had it been approved, it would have made certain that both houses of Congress went on record for or against the president's plan. President Kennedy today asked the Congress for a pay increase for more than 1.5 million white-collar government workers to bring their salaries into line with private industries. The amount of money involved, $1 billion over the next 3 years. The president proposed reform of the federal pay system to provide for wage hikes ranging from 3.7% for clerical workers to 35% for top-bracket employees. The president said enactment of the reform plan was fundamental to the maintenance of a standard of excellence in the federal service. Elsewhere on Capitol Hill, Senator Kenneth Keating asked a Senate committee to expand its inquiry into rights of servicemen to include the question of segregation in the armed forces. He said that while the Pentagon insists that integration has been effected, Negroes were still being forced to use segregated facilities at certain southern bases. A rebuff for Cuba and the Communist bloc today in the United Nations as the General Assembly rejected a last-ditch move to get UN action on Fidel Castro's charges of U.S. intervention. The vote came on a mild resolution introduced by Mongolia, which simply called for friendly relations among countries recognizing the right of self-determination. The U.S. delegate Francis Plimpton called it a trick and declared it would give undue dignity to the Cuban charges, which he called crude, defamatory, and false. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson missed the debate. A spokesman said he is confined to bed with influenza. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara returned to Washington today from his conference with the Pacific Command at Hawaii. McNamara said that U.S. military aid to South Vietnam is becoming more and more effective in the fight against communist guerrillas there, that he was delighted with the progress he noted since his last trip to Hawaii in January. He told newsmen that our training aids and our logistical assistance are becoming more and more effective. He reiterated President Kennedy's recent assurances that no U.S. troops are being put into combat in Vietnam. He did say, however, that technicians and advisors serving with the South Vietnam Army are under instruction to return fire for self-protection if fired upon. There have been recent reports of new weapons being used by the North Vietnamese communists against American planes and helicopters doing transport duty, but McNamara said these appear to be only rifles and small arms. Britain today said that unless NATO helps her correct her balance of payments deficit, she will be forced to reduce the number of British troops stationed on mainland Europe. In her annual white paper on defense, Britain said today that she will fulfill her obligations to NATO, but the proportion of her forces outside the Commonwealth depends on what NATO does to curb the outflow of British currency. And Britain's aviation ministry announced today that Britain, the United States, and West Germany will share equally all future costs of Britain's B-1127, a vertical takeoff fighter plane. The ministry said the three-power agreement is the first of its kind. The plane, designed in 1957, has been built in 2 research models, both of which have been flown, and 4 other experimental models now under construction. Pope John the 23rd today opened a preparatory session for this year's Ecumenical Council and began the meeting by welcoming Poland's Stefan Cardinal Wyszynski, who got special permission to come to Rome at this time. The Pope made no mention of the church-state struggle in Poland, now under a communist regime. In Hamburg, search teams are still looking for victims of last weekend's storm, with the threat of typhus and cholera spurring them on. Over 200 bodies have been recovered so far, and officials say there may be almost as many more in the wreckage the storm left behind. Hamburg's 2 million residents have been warned to boil all their drinking water and not to eat meats and other perishables left in shops when the floodwaters rose. In labor news today, a federal grand jury at Kansas City, Missouri, has indicted 6 Teamster Union officials for alleged embezzlement of union funds. And the United Auto Workers today postponed its scheduled strike at 5 Alice Chalmers manufacturing plants across the nation. The union said that production will be continued at the plants on a day-to-day basis. And that's the story on labor. Now for our daily stock market report direct from the New York Stock Exchange.
The approximate volume on the New York Stock Exchange at the close today was about 3,400,000 shares as compared with 3,350,000 at the close yesterday. Among the most active stocks, 2 oil companies showed gains and 1 declined. Royal Dutch 37.5, up 1/2. Standard Oil of New Jersey 55 7/8, up 1/4.
Now from San Francisco, KCBS covers the Bay Area and the West. 2 men died in a grinding head-on automobile crash on Nimitz Freeway at Oakland today. The victims were 23-year-old Jack Silva and Francisco Souza, both of Oakland. Governor Brown has named William Forbes of San Marino to a 16-year term on the University of California Board of Regents. Forbes, a Republican, succeeds Victor H. Hansen of La Cañada, whose term is expiring. More news in a moment.
A view from the bridge. This is Arthur Miller's unconventional story of Kathy, torn between love and loyalty. Of Eddie, the uncle who raised her as a daughter and loved her as a woman. A View from the Bridge, a raw, rugged motion picture. A View from the Bridge, a bold and honest look at life and love, set against the teeming violence of the Brooklyn docks. A drama that will hit you with the stunning force of a pile driver. A View from the Bridge, starring Raph Malone, one of the most electrifying performers ever to hit the motion picture screen. And introducing the star of Broadway's West Side Story, Carol Lawrence, in her motion picture debut.
A View from the Bridge, hailed by critics as a stunner, a shocker, a great motion picture.
Don't miss Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge.
Opening at the Presidio Theater, San Francisco, tomorrow evening. Exclusive Northern California premiere. Here is the KCBS Regional Weather Service. Cloudy in the Bay Area with a chance of showers today and tomorrow. Cloudy with showers in northern and central California through Wednesday. Snow in the mountains. The expected high temperature in the Bay today, 54 to 59. Low tonight, 40 to 47. Westerly winds 10 to 20 miles an hour. The current downtown San Francisco temperature is 58 degrees. You hear it clearly from KCBS News.
Now the fastest and only through jets to Miami on National Airlines. Fly one jet all the way, no change of jets. Call your travel agent or National Airlines Douglas 26180.
Good afternoon. This is Scott Beach.
And Fred Gurner.
And wow, what a day this has been, huh? Spectrum 74 here, and I usually give you a list of historical events for your calendar. Today, there's no historical event in the past that can possibly surpass and replace what John Glenn has represented for us today. So, just mark your calendar that this is the day, the 20th of February, when an American astronaut went into space for the first time in orbit, and the excitement is so great and so fantastic as to pass everything else. We'll note, by the way, that at 1:30 a special press conference will come on when I'm sure that we'll hear full details on the flight itself from NASA headquarters at Cape Canaveral at 1:30. Fred, what else we got going for us?
Well, we're going to have a money's worth feature during this next half hour with Bill Strawn of Diebold Safe Company, and an interview with John Conte, who is currently in Guys and Dolls at the Sheraton Palace Garden Court. And we'll begin with these features in just a moment.